Okay, so the first type of tissue we're going to go into depth on is going to be epithelial tissue. So as a reminder, epithelial tissue is found in two locations: lining body surfaces, either external body surfaces or internal body surfaces, and also they line glands. Okay, so we're going to be lining that surface as well. So when you're thinking about finding an epithelial tissue, the biggest key is to begin looking for a surface. And as you can see in this slide here, the surface is going to be a big white space. If you think about it, here's my arm, here's the surface, and what's above it? Empty air. And so on a microscope slide, that is going to show up as white space. Okay, and so if we're looking here on this slide right here, we notice that this is white space up here, and so the very first tissue that we go down into has to be epithelial tissue. Okay, so that's one of the first clues whenever you're trying to figure out this microscope slide and what it is look for the white space, and the tissue right next to it is epithelial tissue. Okay, now so let's look at some other slides where we can see this. Okay, so here's a slide. Okay, and so if you were in class with me, I'd ask my students, where's the white space? Well, a lot of students will say, hey, it's up here at the top. And so therefore, this very first tissue that you enter into has to be epithelial tissue. Okay. If we look at this next one, here again, you start by saying, where's the white space? Well, it's right here up at the top. So again, this first tissue must be epithelial tissue. Okay. And finally, this one, again, where's the white space? And it can be at the top or bottom here. It does happen to be at the top again. And so again, first tissue you go into must be epithelial tissue. And let's see. Now I want to show you something different, because there is also this right here. Well, do we see white space here? And the answer would be yes. So you see, anytime you're looking at glands, it's a little bit different because they're very small tubes. So if we're looking at, for example, let's say this is a gland and the stuff being secreted would go up and out the top. This image that you're viewing on your screen is actually looking at the gland this way. And so the center of the gland, where stuff is getting secreted into, that's the white space. And so again, here is going to be the surface of the gland. Here's another surface of part of the gland. And so all around it here is going to be epithelial tissue. So anytime you see these white rings, you should be thinking, I'm probably looking at a gland. And so this tissue right next to the white ring is going to be epithelial tissue. So if we keep on going down this page here, it talks about the types of epithelial tissue by structure. It turns out there's going to be 8 different types of structures of epithelial tissue that we can look at. And and I think what's helpful is actually to group these structures together, looking at what they have in common and what they have that make each type unique. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is actually a software tool called FreeMind, and this is just a way that you can, on your computer, make a map. You can also do this at home, but it's a thing that you can edit yourself. And so to think about epithelial tissue, I would actually start here. I put epithelial tissue in the middle, and I am actually going to add the two basic types. So we have two types. We've got simple, and the other type that we have is going to be stratified. Okay. Now let's think for a minute about what these two terms mean. And to do that, I'm going to show you another PowerPoint slide here. Okay. So if we look here at this slide, I can tell you that three of these types of tissues are simple, and three of these are stratified. Now let's talk about what that means. Again, we start at the same place. We look for white space. So here's white space, here's white space. White space is found at the top. So what that means is we know that going down into the tissue, the first layer of cells that we run into is going to be epithelial tissue. Now, one thing that you may notice is each of these cells, they're going to have a circle inside of them, and that is a nucleus. Okay, and let me actually show you this on a real tissue sample. This is a good one. Okay, again, here we've got our white space up at the top. First tissue we're going into is going to be epithelial tissue. You can clearly see each of these circles, and you notice that up here at the top, these purple circles, okay, they're pretty close together. But as we go farther down into this tissue, we still see purple circles, but you notice they're very spaced apart. And so it's actually the top here that is epithelial tissue, and here we transition into connective tissue. Okay, we can see that again here, white space on top. First we go into epithelial tissue. These circles are spaced pretty close together. So all of this is epithelial until you get right here. Now these nuclei are spaced far apart, and so we've moved into connective tissue again. We can actually look at this here again, white space on top. This is epithelial tissue that we're in. And ask yourself now, when do I move into connective tissue where my nuclei are spaced farther apart? And it should be right at this location. You're moving into connective tissue here. You can see those nuclei are spaced much farther apart. So if we go back down here to our different types, simple versus stratified, here's white space, so here's the surface, here's epithelial tissue, and you can see here we've lost our closely spaced nuclei, so now we're into connective tissue. Okay, so at this point, connective tissue, connective tissue, connective tissue, all right, on each of them. So if it's a simple tissue, epithelial tissue, that means you will go through one layer of cells. Okay, so again, but here if we look, we're going into epithelial tissue. Well, we pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least, a whole bunch of layers of cells before we get down to connective tissue. So you should ask yourself which of these are simple, which of these are stratified, based on how many layers of cells that you're going through. Okay, now after we have this idea of simple versus stratified, we can then subclassify them, because if you notice, the shape of this cell looks quite a bit different from this one. Same over here, the shape looks a bit different. Okay, and so the choices we have, once we decide if they're simple or stratified, you can then call them squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. Okay, so let's look at this. So if we look at the shape of this cell, first we'd say it's simple. And then we look at the shape, well, it's roughly a cube. And so we would then call it simple cuboidal. And so if we're going over here to our classification scheme, we would insert a possibility as simple cuboidal is one possibility of a specific type of simple tissue. Okay, and then if we look over here at this tissue right here, well, if we look through, it's roughly longer going down than it is wider, so it's like a column. And so that would then be an option of simple columnar. Okay. And then the last one we have right here looks a bit like a fried egg sitting on a skillet. And so squished egg is what I think of, and so that's going to be squamous. Okay, and so our last type of simple that we have here is simple squamous. Okay, now we can do the same thing with stratified. Okay, and we're going to choose from those same words. The thing to know here is that when you're picking the shape for a stratified tissue, you look at the top layer to pick that shape, not the bottom layer. So if we look here, we know it's stratified because we go through many layers of cells. We look at the top layer, it looks like a squished egg. That would be stratified squamous. Okay. Here, the top layer looks roughly like a cube, stratified cuboidal. Here, the top layer looks roughly like a column, stratified columnar. Okay, and so again, if we're adding to our map here, we'd have stratified cuboidal. We'd have stratified columnar. And then lastly, we'd have stratified squamous. And so those would be our different types of stratified epithelial tissues. Okay. Now, there's going to be two more types that we want to add in here, and these two are a little bit tricky in how they look. So we've got transitional and we've got pseudostratified columnar. And so my suggestion would be that you watch this video here. It gives a great cartoon animation of transitional. Transitional is going to be transitioning between two shapes. Pseudo-stratified, keep in mind that pseudo means fake, so it looks stratified, but it's faking you out. It is actually simple. And so if we're going to add those into our map, actually under the simple one, we are going to add pseudo-stratified columnar. Okay, so it's actually a simple one, but it fakes you out, makes you think it's stratified. And then transitional, it turns out, is going to be actually a stratified tissue. Now, just so you have a chance to view what those look like on a slide, let me show you those. Let me find them here. Okay, so this one here, it turns out that it looks stratified, but in reality the nuclei are just offset, so it gives the appearance of being stratified. They're not in a straight line, but it actually is a simple tissue. The best clue that I have for that is that if you look on the top border, you see these long hair-like structures. Those are actually cilia. And so cilia are probably the best clue that you're looking at something that's pseudostratified. So if it looks stratified, but you see cilia, it's probably pseudostratified. And then if we're going to look here at a transitional slide, this is a transitional epithelial slide. Okay. What you see, you definitely see something that's stratified, but the tops of these cells, they're roughly cube-like. They look more cube-like than anything, but the tops of these look a little rounded, like they have a little bit of a poof to them. And so that's always the clue to me that it's probably transitional as I look for that poof. Okay. So let's look at some of these different types and see what you can come up with. Okay. So this one here, here's the white space, so we're running into epithelial tissue. Right here is the transition to connective. So it's clearly a stratified tissue. And then remind yourself, if it's stratified, I've got these choices for a specific type. And so the specific type, if we're looking at this, we look at the top layer, we know it's stratified, and these sure look like a squished egg to me. So this would be stratified squamous. Okay, let's now look at this one. We said before that this white space right here was the middle of a gland. Okay, and so this right here is the epithelial tissue. Now notice we just go through one layer before all of a sudden we get to this part in here, which is connective tissue. And notice that we don't see nuclei packed closely together anymore. So we just go through one layer. Okay. And this layer, it doesn't really look like a squished egg. This nucleus isn't squished flat. It's not a column. So this here is going to be simple. And again, if we look at our map, we've got these four choices. It's simple cuboidal in this case. Let's keep going. Okay, so where's the white space here? It's not really at the top this time. Okay, so here's white space. Okay, so all of this is white space. It's not in little circles, so it's not a gland. All right, and here we go through one layer, and now we get into something that looks where the nuclei are spaced differently. So this is a simple tissue. We have choices of simple squamous, cuboidal, columnar, or pseudostratified. Well, here, if you look at these nuclei, they're pretty much in a straight line. They're not really offset from each other too much. And if we go through it, we see they look like they're longer this way than they are wide. So this would be an example of simple columnar. Okay, so let's look here. This time the white space, the surface, is over here up in the right upper corner. Okay, and so if we go down through here, we go here, and then now is our transition from epithelial to connective. We look at the top layer, so we know it's a stratified. We look at the top layer, and they look roughly cube-like, but we notice here we've got a little poofy round. Here's a little poofy round, another one. So this means that it is actually, you could think maybe it's stratified cuboidal, maybe it's transitional, but because of those poofy round parts, it actually will be transitional here. Okay, let's see what other ones we have. And another one that we have here is epithelial tissue. Okay, and this, for this one, you're going to look at this white space, okay, and we notice some here and here, and it kind of looks round like the glands, but it's not those really pretty regular circular rounds, okay. There's this one squished flat, this one almost looks like a heart. Okay, this is a different type of tissue. This is a lung tissue. And so in lung tissue, so one of the clues to that is you've got this white space, but and it looks like it's surrounded by the epithelial tissue, but it's not a real circle like the glands are. So you're looking at lung, and right here you can see really well, here's a surface, here's a surface. We're going through one layer of tissues. Here's that dark purple nucleus. And this looks pretty squished flat. So this is actually simple squamous right here.